On the morning of Bellwether Academy's Silver Jubilee, a veiled woman left a child's wooden hat block on the headmistress's chair. It was no taller than a bread loaf, darkened by age and smooth from years of handling. A swallow had been carved beneath the brim. One wing was perfect. The other ended halfway, as if the knife had slipped or the carver had been interrupted. Esther Hale recognized it before she touched it. She did not remember owning it. She remembered something worse, a pair of flour-dusted hands lowering a little straw hat over it, a woman humming near a hot stove, and the smell of rain caught in wool. The memory lasted only a second. Then the academy bell rang, the corridor filled with girls, and Esther was once again 37 years old, headmistress of the most respectable school for young ladies in western Connecticut. A folded card lay under the block. It contained no greeting.
It said only that Beatrice Bell had earned her place at the academy, that a promise made to a poor girl was still a promise, and that Esther's father had carved the swallow for the daughter he expected to watch grow. The signature read, Nora Bell. Esther was still holding the card when her aunt entered the room. Lavinia Vale wore dove-grey silk and a high collar fastened with seed pearls. At 68, she moved slowly, but she had never entered a room as if she needed permission. Her cane struck the floor once. Her eyes fell on the wooden block, and all the composure left her face. "Where did you get that?" she asked. It was the first time Esther had heard fear in Lavinia's voice. By noon, the factory woman who had brought the block would be standing before 40 donors in the academy parlor. By evening, Esther would deny knowing her. And before winter, every kindness on which Esther had built her life would look different.
Bellwether, Connecticut was a town built around hats and the people who pretended not to smell them. The factories stood along the still river, their brick walls stained by coal smoke. In wet weather, steam settled over the lower streets and carried the sour odor of felt, dye, shellac, and the chemical baths used to stiffen fur. Men blocked the crowns and worked the presses. Women trimmed, stitched, curled feathers, set veils, and carried home the fine dust in their hair. The better houses climbed the northern hill, where the wind came cleaner. Bellwether Academy stood highest of all behind iron gates with white columns, elms, and a cupola visible from almost every factory yard. Esther had spent half her life making certain the school deserved that hill. She knew the name of every pupil, the income of every scholarship fund, the habits of every teacher, and the number of coal scuttles required to keep the dormitory warm through February. She could hear a whispered conversation through a closed classroom door. She could identify an untuned piano key from the second floor. She had sent home daughters of senators for dishonesty and kept daughters of grocers when their fathers failed to pay on time, provided the girls never knew charity had been involved. People called her just. Some called her cold. She had learned to accept both words as praise. The Jubilee should have been the cleanest triumph of her life. For 25 years, the Academy had taught girls more than deportment. Its pupils studied history, geometry, botany, bookkeeping, and enough Latin to offend men who believed a woman's education should fit inside a parlor. Esther had expanded the library, hired a woman trained at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to teach elementary science, and persuaded reluctant trustees to install electric lights in the study hall. The afternoon ceremony would announce a new East Wing, paid for largely by Lavinia. Everything had been arranged down to the white ribbons on the chairs. Then came the hat block. Esther placed the card in her desk and told herself the memories it stirred were false ones. Childhood was an unreliable country. A smell could invent a room. A tune could lend a stranger the face of someone loved. Her mother, Lenora Hale, had abandoned her in 1879. That was the fact. Lenora had left a 7-year-old child at Lavinia's house and disappeared after stealing a pearl brooch. She had later died in Bridgeport under circumstances too miserable for discussion.
Lavinia had raised Esther, educated her, given her a name the doors opened for, and finally placed the academy in her hands. A life built on facts did not tremble because a factory woman owned a piece of carved wood. "It should be burned," Lavinia said. Esther looked at her aunt. "Why?" "Because it belongs to an ugly time, and ugly times grow sentimental when they are allowed to survive." Lavinia reached for the block. Esther moved it aside before she knew she meant to. Her aunt's mouth tightened. "Nora Bell has been a nuisance in this town for years. She runs that evening room on Cinder Street, fills young women's heads with grievances, and writes petitions whenever a factory owner asks for a reasonable day's work." Esther knew the evening room. It occupied the second floor above a cooper's shop and offered tea, reading lessons, and a place for factory girls to sit without buying anything. The trustees considered it a seedbed of union feeling. Esther had considered it none of her concern until Nora Bell submitted an application for Beatrice. Beatrice Bell, known as Birdie, had taken the academy entrance examinations in May. She was 15, with an unevenly cut fringe, ink on her middle finger, and the highest score Esther had seen in 6 years. She solved geometry proofs in her head. Her essay on Abigail Adams was fierce, poorly punctuated, and alive. The scholarship committee had promised a place if the girl completed the preparatory work during summer. Then 2 donors learned that Nora Bell had raised her. Neither woman objected to poverty. Poverty was useful at ceremonies, where it could be uplifted. What they objected to was Nora's habit of speaking plainly about factory girls who went blind over black veils, and children whose hands were small enough to clean beneath the cutting machines. One donor threatened to withdraw the annual prize for scripture. Another said the academy would be accused of educating agitators. The trustees postponed Birdie's admission. Esther had signed the postponement. "The girl is not responsible for Mrs. Bell's opinions," Esther said. "Then Mrs. Bell should have considered that before making herself notorious." Lavinia's gaze settled on the card in Esther's hand. "She has found the one method she thinks will weaken you. Do not reward her." "How did she get the block?" "From a rubbish heap, perhaps?" The lower streets are full of people who know what can be sold back to the families they envy. It was a cruel answer, and too quick. Esther turned the block in her hands. Along one side were 3 pencil marks under old varnish. Beside them, barely visible, were numbers: 5, 6, 7. A child's growing head measured by someone unwilling to trust memory. "You said my father made hat stretchers." "Your father made trouble. Occasionally he made objects as well." Daniel Hale had been dead 30 years. In Esther's mind, he existed as a narrow photograph in a silver frame, a young man with serious eyes, one hand resting on the back of a chair. Lavinia rarely spoke of him. She said he had been a gifted block carver and a fool who believed factory owners could be shamed into generosity. He died after an explosion at the Vale finishing works. Esther remembered no funeral, only black cloth over a mirror and her mother's body shaking in a kitchen chair. She remembered that now, or thought she did. Lavinia tapped the floor with her cane. "Put it away. The Pritchards will arrive in half an hour." At the name, Esther straightened. Charles Pritchard was chairman of the Academy Board, a widower of 45, and the owner of 3 retail hap houses stretching from New Haven to Albany. In October, if Esther consented, he would become her husband. No formal announcement had been made, but Bellwether had already noticed the frequency of his calls and the care with which his daughter Alice was seated beside Esther at church. Charles respected educated women. He said so often. He admired Esther's discipline, her command of the academy, and the fact that she had never allowed loneliness to make her careless. Marriage to him would secure the school against every uncertain subscription. It would also place Esther, at 37, inside the ordinary circle of family life she had spent years observing from the outside. There was no reason the thought should make her feel as if a door had quietly locked.
She put the block in the lower cupboard of her desk. For the next 2 hours, she reviewed speeches, corrected the placement of palms, and sent 3 girls back upstairs to change ribbons that were not Academy blue. She did not think of Nora Bell. She thought of the woman constantly. Shortly before noon, the first donors gathered in the front parlor for a private luncheon. Their hats were summer constructions of straw, chiffon, silk roses, curled quills, and one unfortunate stuffed tern. The room smelled of coffee and heliotrope. Lavinia occupied the chair nearest the marble fireplace. Charles stood beside her, silver at his temples and calm in a way that made other people lower their voices. Alice Pritchard sat near the window. At 14, she was pale, long-fingered, and so obedient that Esther sometimes wanted to shake her. She drew constantly in the margins of hymnals and then rubbed the pictures away before anyone could see them. The trustees were discussing the East Wing when a maid entered and whispered to Esther that a woman refused to leave the vestibule. "She says she was invited to hear the scholarship decision," the maid added. "She has the Bell girl with her." Every head in the parlor seemed to turn at once. Esther felt Lavinia's attention like a hand between her shoulder blades. She went into the hall. Nora Bell stood inside the front door in a plain black dress, shiny at the elbows. A dark veil covered the left side of her face, though she was not in mourning. She held herself erect, but her right hand trembled against the handle of a worn carpet bag. Beside her stood Birdie, in a brown dress that had been lengthened at the hem. The girl's chin was high. Her eyes were fixed on the Academy's mosaic floor, as if she were memorizing a country from which she expected to be expelled. Esther had seen Nora at a distance, addressing a town meeting, and once leading women from a flooded tenement. Up close, the woman seemed smaller. Grey threaded her dark hair. A pale scar disappeared beneath the veil near her jaw. Her visible eye rested on Esther with an expression that was neither pleading nor surprise. "Mrs. Bell," Esther said, "this is not the hour for applicants." Nora answered that it was the exact hour named in the Academy's note. She had brought Birdie to hear whether work and merit still had the meanings printed in the school prospectus. Her voice was low and roughened. It touched the same hidden place the hat block had touched. Esther looked at Birdie. "The committee has not completed its decision." The girl's face changed very little. Only her fingers tightened around a rolled sheet of paper. Nora asked whether the committee lacked time or courage. The parlor had gone silent behind Esther. It would have been easier if Nora had shouted. Respectable people knew what to do with shouting. Her restraint made every word travel farther. "Your conduct is not helping the child," Esther said. For the first time, pain showed in Nora's eye. "No. A woman's conduct seldom helps a child once people with money decide the child must answer for it." Lavinia appeared in the parlor doorway. She seemed taller than she had in Esther's office. The women behind her formed a bright wall of silk and feathers. "Lenora," she said. No one moved. Esther heard the old clock in the reception room strike a single half-hour. She heard a carriage on the drive. She heard Birdie take a breath. Nora lifted her veil. The scar covered the left side of her face from temple to chin, pulling the corner of her mouth slightly downward. It was not the scar Esther knew. It was the eye above it, grey-green and steady. Esther had seen that eye in her own mirror every morning of her adult life. "My name is Nora Bell," the woman said. Lavinia answered that a changed name did not cleanse an old one. The room behind them awakened in whispers. Esther felt the floor alter under her feet. Her mother was dead in Bridgeport. Her mother had abandoned her. Her mother had been 26 when Esther last saw her, not the scarred woman standing in the vestibule. A fact could not have grey hair. A fact could not tremble. "Who is she?" Charles asked.
Lavinia looked directly at Esther. It was an order and an appeal. Esther could have asked the woman one question. She could have spoken the childhood name that had risen in her throat. She could have remembered that Birdie was 15 and surrounded by strangers who had already decided what kind of future she deserved. Instead, Esther did what Lavinia had trained her to do whenever chaos approached. She protected the institution. "She is no one connected with the academy," she said. Nora did not flinch. That made it worse.
Esther told the maid to show both visitors out and informed Birdie that the committee's decision would be sent by post. Birdie unrolled the paper she had been holding. It was her certificate from the academy examinations, with Esther's own signature beneath the words, "Qualified with distinction." The girl tore it once, carefully, and left the pieces on the hall table. Nora lowered her veil. As she passed Esther, she said only, "He finished the second wing after you learned to read. You may look beneath the base." Then she and Birdie walked down the white steps between two rows of arriving guests. The donors returned to their luncheon. Charles closed the parlor doors. Lavinia explained that the visitor had once worked for the family and suffered delusions after a factory accident. It was painful, she said, but charity could not require respectable women to indulge every claim made at their door. No one asked Esther whether she agreed. Charles took her arm. His hand was warm and firm. He praised her composure. "An institution," he said, "survived because its leader understood that private feeling must never endanger public trust." Esther looked through the glass beside the door. At the gate, Birdie was walking 3 paces ahead of Nora. The older woman tried once to take her hand. The girl pulled away. For the first time that day, Esther understood exactly what she had done. The ceremony began at 3, beneath a white pavilion on the south lawn. 200 people listened while the mayor praised female cultivation, a phrase he used 3 times without explaining it. A quartet of pupils sang. Lavinia presented the deed for the East Wing. Charles announced that Bellwether Academy would enter its second quarter-century free of debt. Esther delivered her address without looking at her notes. She spoke about truth as the foundation of education. She said a girl trained only to repeat what pleased others had not been educated at all. She promised that Bellwether would teach its pupils courage, judgment, and the discipline to examine every claim. The applause lasted nearly a minute. Each sentence seemed to leave a taste of iron in her mouth. At supper, Lavinia sat at the center of the family table in the headmistress's residence. Charles and Alice remained as guests. So did Lavinia's widowed stepson, Raymond Vale, who managed what remained of the family finishing works. Raymond had soft hands, restless eyes, and a habit of agreeing most warmly with whoever controlled the room. The conversation avoided the visitor until Alice asked why the scarred woman had called Mrs. Vale by her sister's name. Charles corrected his daughter sharply. Esther surprised herself by saying the question was reasonable. Lavinia set down her spoon. "The Nora was my younger sister. Grief and bad company made her unstable. After Daniel Hale's death, she left Esther with me and vanished. Years later, I was told she had died." "Who told you?" Esther asked. Her aunt's pause was short, but Esther heard it. "A person with no reason to lie." Raymond spoke too quickly. He remembered hearing the same thing, though he had been a child at the time. Esther asked whether the woman in the vestibule was Lenora. "A resemblance proves nothing," Lavinia said. "You called her by that name." Charles laid his napkin beside his plate. He suggested that distress had made Lavinia speak without certainty and that continuing the subject would only reward an impostor. It was the sensible view. It was offered in the same tone he used when ruling a board discussion closed. Esther saw Alice rub a thumb over a smear of charcoal on her cuff until the fabric reddened her skin. "What did my mother call me?" Esther asked. Lavinia's face hardened. "Esther." "Only Esther?" There had been another name once, a small name associated with rain against glass and the pressure of a cheek against her hair. It would not come. "You're tired," Lavinia said.
"This day has been too much."
Esther rose from the table. Charles followed her into the hall. He was not angry. Anger would have admitted she possessed the power to disorder him. He said he understood the shock, but advised her not to visit Cinder Street or answer any further communication. There were newspapers eager to turn a family misfortune into a sensation. The Academy's expansion, their future, and Alice's peace all required discretion. Their future. He had never formally asked Esther to marry him. They had reached an understanding in which the important decision seemed to have occurred somewhere beyond her presence. "Did you know?" she asked. Charles looked genuinely puzzled. "That Mrs. Bell claimed to be my mother." He admitted that Lavinia had mentioned an unstable relative when Nora began pressing Birdie's application. He had considered the matter unworthy of Esther's attention. "You discussed my mother without me." "We discussed a threat to the school."
Esther had spent years admiring the precision with which Charles separated feeling from fact. Now the separation looked less like strength and more like a clean knife. He took her hand. He said the best way to protect everything she had built was to let him manage the trustees until the disturbance passed. After their marriage, she might even welcome relief from daily administration. Alice needed guidance. The Pritchard homes in New Haven and Bellwether required a mistress. Esther could remain the Academy's honored principal without exhausting herself over timetables and furnace repairs. It was the first clear picture he had given her of married life. In it, the school belonged to him. Esther withdrew her hand and said she had letters to answer. When he left, she returned to her office, locked the door, and took the hat block from the cupboard. The base was covered with green baize. She worked one edge loose with a paper knife. Beneath it, the wood showed a second carving. The unfinished wing of the swallow continued around the curve and opened into letters no larger than eyelashes. For Essie, who will always know the way home. Essie. The name broke over her with the force of recognition. She was 5 years old, sitting on a table while her father measured her head with a ribbon. Her mother stood at the stove, laughing because Esther refused to keep still. Daniel promised to carve a bird fast enough to catch her. Her mother bent close and called her Essie girl. Outside, rain struck the window. Inside, the kitchen smelled of wool, flour, and wet wood. Esther sat on the office floor with the block against her chest. She did not weep. Lavinia had taught her very young that tears were a request made to people who might refuse it. But long after the academy went dark, the headmistress remained on the floor, listening to a dead man's promise and the footsteps of a living woman leaving her door. On Monday, the Bellwether Gazette printed 3 paragraphs about the disturbance at the Jubilee. The article did not name Nora. It referred to a confused factory widow and praised Esther's dignity in the face of an unpleasant personal claim. By breakfast, every pupil knew. By chapel, 3 versions had circulated through the dormitory, including one in which Nora had arrived with a pistol inside the hat block. Esther confiscated 2 notes, corrected one teacher's nervous account, and instructed the girls that gossip was a form of cowardice. Her voice did not shake. At 10, she received the scholarship committee's final recommendation. Beatrice Bell was to be refused admission for want of a suitable home influence. The phrase was Charles's. Esther recognized his tidy hand in the margin. Her signature line waited at the bottom. She placed the paper inside a book and went to teach rhetoric. The lesson concerned the difference between proof and assertion. A pupil named Marian observed that people often demanded more proof from those they disliked than from those they trusted. The class laughed because Marian was usually silent and had surprised them. Esther did not laugh. Afterward, Alice Pritchard remained behind.
She was a day pupil and usually went home in her father's carriage. She asked whether the academy truly taught drawing anywhere beyond botanical diagrams. Esther said the fine arts instructor offered watercolor twice each week. Alice explained, with great care, that she did not mean flowers. She meant buildings, machines, hands at work, streets after rain. Her father called such subjects ugly. He had found her portfolio and burned 6 drawings in the kitchen range. He had said a girl who cultivated ugliness would become ugly in spirit. The confession was made without accusation. That troubled Esther more. She asked what Alice wanted her to do. The girl lowered her eyes.
Nothing. I only wanted one person to know they existed. Esther thought of the hat block hidden beneath green baize for 29 years. She gave Alice a key to the disused map room in the west corridor. The room had a north window and could be locked from inside. She told the girl that a portfolio could be kept in the flat cabinet under the maps, provided no lesson was neglected. Alice looked at her as if she had been handed a country. It was a small act. Esther felt ashamed of how much relief it gave her. At luncheon, Lavinia arrived without notice and asked whether the scholarship refusal had been signed. Not yet. Why? Because the stated reason has nothing to do with the girl's ability. Lavinia removed her gloves 1 finger at a time. Suitability has everything to do with ability. A pupil brings her home through the gates with her. Habits, associations, loyalties, you know this. Esther said she knew that people used suitability when they did not wish to name prejudice. Her aunt's gaze sharpened. Has Lenora visited you again? No? Then the block has accomplished enough. Esther placed it on the desk between them. For a moment, Lavinia looked very old. You told me my mother was dead. I told you what allowed you to live. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Lavinia stood and walked to the window. Below, girls in blue skirts crossed the lawn in pairs. 25 years earlier, there had been 40 pupils. Now, there were 112, and Lavinia knew exactly how many roof slates, scholarship teas, and humiliating visits to wealthy drawing rooms had made the increase possible. She said Lenora had never been capable of giving Esther such a life. After Daniel died, she had no money, no judgment, and no concern for consequences. She chose factory lodgings, radical companions, and public quarrels. She arrived at the Vale House in all weather, demanding a child she could not feed. Once, she tried to remove Esther from school by force. Another time, she accused Lavinia's husband of causing Daniel's death. At last, she stole a brooch and disappeared. Did you see her steal it? Esther asked. Lavinia turned. I found it in her bag. Did you see her die? Silence entered the room. Esther asked again who had reported the death. Lavinia said Raymond's father had received word from Bridgeport. She no longer remembered the messenger's name. It had been decades. Grief blurred details. You do not forget details, Esther said. Her aunt's face closed. She reminded Esther who had sat beside her through scarlet fever, who had sold land during the Panic of 1893 rather than close the academy, who had defended her appointment when trustees said a woman under 30 could not command a school. All of it was true. Lavinia had braided Esther's hair when she was small, though too tightly. She had walked the bedroom during fever.
She had shown love through action, money, vigilance, and control so complete it could be mistaken for the walls of the world. Must every kindness become a debt? Esther asked. Lavinia recoiled as if struck. The pain in her expression lasted only an instant, but Esther saw it and nearly apologized. Habit rose in her, powerful as prayer. Then she remembered Birdie tearing the examination certificate. I will hear Lenora's account, Esther said. If you go to that room, do not use the academy carriage. Why? Because the horses belong to the trust. They both understood the sentence. Lavinia had not forbidden Esther to go. She had merely begun itemizing what disobedience would cost. Esther waited until Thursday afternoon. She told herself the delay was caused by examinations, a leaking pipe in the dormitory, and a teacher's influenza. In truth, she had crossed oceans of fear from the safety of a lectern and could not make herself cross Cinder Street. She walked there alone beneath a plain hat and carried the wooden block in a canvas bag. The lower town began 4 streets below the academy. The sidewalks narrowed. Laundry hung between tenements. Children played beside barrels of fur clippings, pale as dirty snow. At the open doors of the finishing shops, women bent over tables beneath gas jets, their fingers moving through veils and ribbon. Men with gray complexions came out at the change of shift. Several had the familiar tremor Bellwether called the Hatter's Shake, as if naming it after the trade made it less terrible. The evening room occupied the upper floor of a brick building between a cooper and a dealer in used stoves. Its sign had been painted by hand. One of the 2 windows was cracked. Esther climbed the stairs. She expected agitation, slogans, and perhaps the theatrical misery described by trustees. She found 12 young women reading newspapers at scarred tables. A kettle steamed on a small range. Shelves held primers, novels, arithmetic books, and jars of buttons sorted by color. In one corner, 2 girls practiced writing their names. In another, Birdie explained fractions to a woman twice her age using slices of an apple. The room quieted when Esther entered. Nora sat near the window, trimming black crepe from a mourning bonnet. Her veil was lifted. In daylight, the scar looked older than the rest of her, smooth and pale. Her right hand trembled, but the scissors in her left moved steadily. She asked the girls to continue and led Esther into a small workroom behind a curtain. Wooden hat blocks filled the shelves. Some were broad and low, others tall, narrow, domed or ridged, according to fashions that had risen and vanished. Steam had darkened the ceiling. On the work table lay tacks, pullers, cord, brushes, chalk, and a shallow bowl of water. Esther set the canvas bag down. Nora did not ask whether she had come as headmistress or daughter. She did not ask to be called by any name. She waited. "Why did you bring this to the academy?" Esther said. "Because Birdie's future was being measured against my past. You could have appealed the decision without making a claim about me." "I appealed twice. Your secretary returned the second letter unopened. You chose the day of the jubilee. It was the one day the people who made the decision would all be in the same room." Esther heard accusation and resented it because it was accurate. She removed the block. Nora reached toward it, then stopped before touching the wood. "My father carved it." "Yes." "How did you get it?" "I kept it." The answer was so simple that Esther's prepared questions scattered. Nora told her Daniel had carved the first wing on Esther's 5th birthday and hidden her pet name beneath the base. After he died, the block remained in their rooms over a bakery. When Lavinia took Esther for what was meant to be 6 weeks, Nora packed the child's dresses but kept the block because Daniel had promised to add a mark every birthday. She expected Esther home before the leaves turned. "Why was I not?" Nora looked through the curtain toward Birdie. "Because expecting a thing and having the power to make it happen are not the same. You left me. I placed you with my sister while I went to Bridgeport for work. When I returned, she would not let me through the door. She said you disappeared. I came back after 38 days. She said you stole from her." Nora's mouth tightened along the scar. She answered that Lavinia's pearl brooch had indeed been found in her carpetbag. She had not placed it there and could not prove who had. Silas Vale offered a choice. If she left Bellwether and stopped accusing his factory of negligence, He would not prosecute. Esther would remain in school.
If she stayed, he would send her to jail and place the child wherever the town saw fit. You expect me to believe that my aunt conspired to steal her own brooch? No, I expect nothing from you. The restraint felt like contempt. Esther asked why Nora had waited 29 years to tell her. I did not. Nora moved to a cupboard and took out a narrow wooden box. Inside lay small carved swallows. Some were walnut, some maple, some pale pine. There were 23 in all. Each bore a year on the underside. Your father had planned to put one on every hat he made for you, Nora said. After he died, I carved them badly until I learned to carve them well. The earliest birds were rough. Their wings were uneven, their beaks too blunt. Later ones seemed ready to lift from Nora's palm. Esther touched none of them. Nora explained that she had tried to see Esther on birthdays, at school recitations, after church, and once at a train platform when Lavinia took her to Boston. She sent the birds through servants and teachers. Most were returned. Some vanished. When Esther was 9, Nora reached the academy gate and called her name. The memory came before Esther could stop it. A woman in a rain-dark dress clinging to the iron bars. A crowd of girls watching. Lavinia's hand on Esther's shoulder. Someone saying the woman had come to steal a child. Esther hiding her face in Lavinia's skirt. Nora had seen her do it. You frightened me, Esther whispered. I know. There was no reproach in the words. That was worse than anger, too. After that day, Nora said, she stopped approaching Esther in public. She learned which milliners supplied the academy and took finishing work from them. For years, she made the hats worn by Bellwether girls at commencement. When Esther graduated, Nora shaped the crown that sat on her head. When Esther became a teacher, Nora stitched the narrow velvet band on her winter hat. She never inserted the swallows. She had learned that a hidden claim could become another burden. Esther remembered the hats. Brown felt at 17, blue straw at 21, a black toque after Lavinia's husband died. Ordinary things worn through snow and summer, brushed, pinned, forgotten. Why tell me now? I did not come to tell you who to love. Nora's gaze moved toward the classroom. I came because you promised Birdie a place and took it away when respectable people became uncomfortable. I know what it is to have a promise altered in a room where you are not allowed to speak. Esther asked whether Birdie was her daughter. No. Her mother worked the curling table at Keene's and died of fever when Birdie was 6. Her father is alive and weak in ways that do not leave bruises, but leave a child hungry. I took her because no one else did. And you call yourself Bell. I married Thomas Bell in Bridgeport. He was kind. He died 12 years ago. The fact of another husband struck Esther with unreasonable force. Nora had possessed a life beyond waiting. Perhaps she had laughed in rooms Esther had never seen. Perhaps Thomas Bell had known the name Essie. Did he know about me? Everyone close to me knew about you. Esther turned away. On the shelf nearest her stood a block for a woman's crown. A swallow was carved under its base, both wings complete. Nora said that one had been made for Esther's 25th birthday. She had meant to send it. On that day, the Gazette published a speech in which Esther credited Lavinia with saving her from a mother who preferred disorder to duty. Nora decided not to answer public gratitude with private pain. Esther remembered the speech. She had been newly appointed headmistress and terrified of failure. Lavinia sat in the front row. The sentence had earned the longest applause. I believed what I had been told. Children must believe the person who feeds them. I was 25. Nora's hand began to tremble more strongly. She folded it into her apron. Some cages continue feeding us after we are old enough to open them. The words were not loud. They landed with the weight of a verdict.
Esther placed the child's block on the work table. She said she could not reverse an academy decision because of a personal story that had not been proved. Nora's expression finally changed. Not anger, weariness. She asked what proof Esther required from a poor woman that she had never required from a rich one. Esther had no answer that would survive being spoken. She returned the block to the bag and left. At the top of the stairs, Birdie called after her. The girl had put aside the apple and stood with chalk on her hands. She said Nora had not wanted to reveal herself. Birdie had found the Academy's returned letters and threatened to go to the Gazette alone. Nora had brought the block to prevent the girl from turning a private cruelty into a public weapon. "She protected you even from me," Birdie said. "You may punish me for saying it. You seem practiced." Several women in the room looked up. Esther descended the stairs without replying. Outside, the factory whistles marked the end of a shift. Hundreds of women poured into Cinder Street, carrying lunch tins, rubbing cramped fingers, calling to children. Esther stood among them in her academy gloves and felt more conspicuous than she had ever felt before a crowded hall. She had gone to seek the truth. She had found a woman whose account wounded her, a girl she had wronged, and 23 wooden birds that might mean love or manipulation or both. For the first time in her life, she did not know which voice in her mind belonged to judgment and which belonged to fear. For 3 days, Esther behaved as if uncertainty could be exhausted by work. She inspected dormitory mattresses, revised the autumn timetable, and corrected every comma in the academy catalogue. She signed 17 certificates and left Birdie's refusal unsigned. At night, she carried the child's block to her residence and hid it in the wardrobe beneath winter blankets. Each morning, she returned it to her office, unwilling to leave it near Lavinia and unable to explain why. On Sunday, she attended First Congregational Church with her aunt. Bellwether's most important families occupied the center pews. Factory foremen and prosperous tradesmen sat behind them. Workers filled the galleries or attended the Catholic parish across the river, the Methodist chapel near the yards, or nowhere respectable people could observe. Nora Bell sat in the last pew on the left with Birdie and 4 women from the evening room. During the sermon, Reverend Sloane spoke about false witness. His text concerned a vineyard, but his glances wandered repeatedly toward the rear pew. Afterward, the congregation gathered beneath the maples for lemonade. Women who had discussed Nora all week turned their backs as she passed. Lavinia received sympathy as if she had suffered a bereavement. Mrs. Pritchard's sister, Cordelia Ames, touched Lavinia's sleeve and said blood was often the least reliable measure of family. Cordelia was a broad woman with a soft voice and a pearl hatpin nearly 6 inches long. She assured Esther that everyone understood the burden of being claimed by an unfortunate relation. Esther saw Birdie hear her. The girl had been carrying a tray of lemonade for the church sexton's wife. One glass tilted. A few drops darkened her cuff. Cordelia looked at the stain, then at the girl, and drew her skirt aside. It was a movement so slight, no one could accuse her of cruelty. That was why Esther recognized its perfection. Nora set down her own cup and guided Birdie away. She did not look at Esther. Lavinia did. "You see what follows when boundaries are weakened," she said. Esther saw something else. She saw herself in the academy vestibule speaking the sentence that permitted every smaller humiliation afterward. That afternoon, she visited Martha Price. Martha had worked in the Vale household from before Esther's birth until rheumatism bent her fingers. She now lived with a married daughter in a yellow house near the African Methodist Church. At 74, she wore her white hair in a firm knot and had the clear, unimpressed gaze of someone who had carried other people's secrets upstairs with their wash water. She listened to Esther's questions without visible surprise. "Took you long enough," she said when Esther finished. It was the first direct sentence anyone had allowed themselves on the subject. Martha remembered the 6 weeks after Daniel Hale's death. The explosion had occurred in the steaming room of Silas Vale's finishing works. 3 men died immediately. Daniel lived 2 days with burns across his chest.
Lenora had been in the yard bringing his dinner and ran into the building before the second alarm. A falling pane of glass cut her face. She carried out a boy of 14 and went back for Daniel, though the foreman stopped her. Silas Vale called the explosion an act of God. Daniel's friends called it a neglected pressure valve. Lenora called it murder in front of a reporter from New Haven. That was when Mr. Vale decided grief had made her dangerous, Martha said. Lavinia initially took Esther out of kindness. Martha insisted on that. Lenora had fever in her wound and no money for rent. She planned to work at a trimming house in Bridgeport, where Thomas Bell's widowed mother supervised a floor. Lavinia promised to keep Esther until Lenora had 2 rooms and steady wages. "Your aunt bought you shoes," Martha said. "Sat up with you when you woke crying. She did love you. There is no need to make one truth smaller so the other can fit." Esther was grateful and angered by the fairness. Lenora returned in September. Silas met her in the front hall. Martha heard most of the quarrel from the dining room. Lenora demanded her daughter. Silas demanded a public retraction concerning the explosion and the men meeting to form an association. Lenora refused. Lavinia begged them both to be reasonable, which meant she begged Lenora to yield because Silas never did. By nightfall, a pearl and onyx brooch was missing from Lavinia's dressing table. It appeared inside Lenora's bag, beneath a clean child's nightdress she had brought for Esther. "Who put it there?" Esther asked. Martha's mouth flattened. "I did not see a hand." "But you suspect someone." "Suspicion is a luxury when you work in another woman's house." Silas summoned a constable. In the kitchen, he offered Lenora his bargain. She could leave Bellwether and keep away from Esther, or she could be charged with theft. Lavinia stood beside the stove and said nothing for so long that her silence became agreement.
Lenora left before dawn. "Why did you never tell me?" Esther asked. Martha examined her bent hands. She said she had tried once, when Esther was 11. Lavinia dismissed her for insolence and rehired her 2 months later when Esther became ill. Martha had a husband injured at the livery yard, 2 daughters, and rent. Courage did not feed them. She did what people without power often did. She saved what small pieces she could. From a cupboard she brought a biscuit tin. Inside lay 7 wooden swallows and a bundle of narrow blue ribbons faded almost gray. Lenora had sent a bird every year through Martha. The first time, Martha placed it beneath Esther's pillow. Lavinia found it and burned it in the bedroom grate. After that, Martha kept them. 1 swallow bore the year Esther turned 12. Another marked 17, the year she graduated. The last was dated 1896, when Esther became headmistress. "She came to the kitchen door that year," Martha said. "Did not ask to see you.
Asked whether you looked pleased." Esther's hands closed around the small bird. Martha said Lenora had brought one more thing on that visit, a hat box from a shop that supplied the academy. Inside was Esther's new headmistress's hat, shaped and trimmed by Lenora's hands. Lavinia allowed Esther to wear it because she did not know who had made it. "Your mother laughed about that," Martha said. "Not kindly, not cruelly either. A laugh can be the sound grief makes when it has been told to behave." Esther remembered the hat. Dark green felt, modest brim, a single grosgrain band. She had worn it until rain spoiled the crown. Lavinia had praised its restraint. Martha pushed the tin toward her. Esther asked why the birds stopped after 1896. "They did not stop. I retired. Mrs. Hale found another road." "Mrs. Bell." Martha gave her a long look. "A woman may take a second husband without surrendering the first life she lived." Esther left with the 7 swallows wrapped in a handkerchief.
At the academy gate, she found Charles waiting beside his carriage. He knew where she had been. Bellwether rarely required spies. A headmistress walking alone into the lower town was news enough to travel faster than a horse. Charles said he had postponed the trustees' meeting to spare her embarrassment. He asked to see what she carried. Esther refused. His expression did not change, but something in his courtesy cooled. He told her that Alice had become secretive at school. The girl locked herself in unused rooms and had refused to show him her books. Esther said Alice had completed every lesson and behaved well. "That is not what I asked." It was a small sentence. It revealed the entire arrangement he expected from her. She would supervise women and girls, but her judgment would remain valid only where it agreed with his authority. Esther said Alice was entitled to a private thought. Charles answered that privacy was an adult privilege, not a hiding place for disobedience. He reminded Esther that Lavinia had trusted him to steady the academy after the Jubilee disturbance. The board would vote on Birdie's admission Tuesday. If Esther continued withholding her signature, he would bring the matter to the full trust. "Do that," Esther said. He stared at her. She had challenged trustees for years over curriculum and salaries. She had never challenged Charles in a matter he considered family. "You are letting an old grievance use you," he said. "It is not my grievance. That seems to be the difficulty." The carriage drove away without her. Esther walked through the iron gates carrying 7 small birds that had waited longer than most people waited for justice. The trustees met Tuesday evening in the Academy library. There were 9 of them, 4 businessmen, 2 clergymen, 2 wealthy widows, and Esther. Lavinia held no official seat, but attended by privilege of her gifts. Charles presided. Birdie's application came last. Charles praised the girl's examination results and then described the risks associated with her guardian. Nora had signed a petition for shorter hours in the finishing rooms. She had accused a foreman at Keen's of striking a worker. She had allowed union men to use the evening room during a winter storm. None of these acts proved criminality. Together, Charles said, they demonstrated an atmosphere incompatible with Bellwether's character. Reverend Sloane spoke of moral contagion. Trustee Miriam Cole, who had inherited a dry goods fortune and an inconvenient conscience, asked whether moral contagion traveled through geometry lessons. No one answered her. Esther read Birdie's essay aloud. She omitted the girl's name until the end. The trustees listened to a 15-year-old argue that a nation which praised Republican motherhood while denying women serious education feared not female ignorance, but female judgment. Mrs. Ames called the essay impertinent. "It is," Esther said.
It is also excellent.
She recommended admission on full scholarship. Charles reminded the room that the headmistress had a personal entanglement with the guardian and should abstain. "The personal entanglement existed when I signed the girl's examination certificate. I was merely the only person not told." Lavinia's cane struck the carpet. The vote split 4-4. Charles held the deciding ballot. He rejected Birdie. Then Lavinia announced that the East Wing gift would be reconsidered if the Academy allowed itself to become an instrument for attacks upon the Vale family. The room changed. Men who had spoken of principle looked at the architectural plans. The East Wing meant laboratories, 30 more pupils, and work already promised to local builders. A gift could become more authoritative than any argument because it employed other people's hopes. Esther asked whether Lavinia's condition would be entered in the minutes. "There is no need," Charles said. "Then there should be no condition." He ruled her out of order. The meeting ended with Birdie refused and the East Wing secure. In the empty library, Lavinia approached Esther. Her exhaustion was visible now. She said she had not wanted to threaten the school, but Esther had forced her. Institution survived through compromise. "You mean other people compromise?" Esther said. "I mean adults choose which pain they can afford." Esther asked what pain Lavinia had chosen in 1879. For an instant, her aunt's gaze flickered toward Raymond, who was gathering papers near the door. "Be careful," Lavinia said. It sounded less like a threat than a warning about ground neither woman understood. Raymond waited until Lavinia left. Then he told Esther that the old story was more complicated than Nora and Martha knew. His father Silas had been harsh, but he had protected hundreds of livelihoods. After the explosion, talk of negligence could have closed the works and ruined the town. Daniel Hale had tampered with equipment during an unauthorized meeting. Silas suppressed that fact to spare Esther shame. "Were you there?" Esther asked. Raymond had been 8 years old. "Then who told you?" "My father." Again, a rich man's assertion had become a fact merely by surviving. Raymond said there might still be old objects from the steaming room in the Vale storage building. When the factory downsized, tools and patterns had been moved there. He offered to look, provided Esther promised not to involve the Gazette or labor men. She asked what he was afraid of. He laughed without humor. "At my age? Mostly the past deciding it has waited long enough." September began with hard rain. The academy term opened under a cloud of gossip and wet wool. Birdie did not appear among the new pupils. Her absence occupied Esther more strongly than many presences. In the second week, a junior student split the side seam of her uniform before morning chapel.
The housekeeper sent for a woman who did emergency mending when the academy seamstress was ill. Birdie arrived with a basket of thread. Esther found her kneeling in the cloakroom, pinning the hem while the embarrassed pupil stood on a bench. Birdie worked quickly and spoke gently. She did not look at Esther. When the repair was finished, Esther asked why Nora had sent her. Birdie said Nora had not. She had taken paid work from the seamstress because examination certificates did not buy coal. Esther told her she should not speak to the headmistress with disrespect. Birdie gathered her pins. Respect is the name people give silence when they expect it from someone poorer. The pupil on the bench stared at the ceiling. Esther could have dismissed Birdie from the grounds. Instead, she asked whether the girl still studied. Every evening, Birdie said. Mrs. Cole had lent her algebra texts. She planned to sit the state teacher's examination when she was old enough. Bellwether did not own the subjects it had refused to teach her. Pride rose in Esther before shame covered it. She paid Birdie from the residence account and added twice the usual fee. Birdie counted the coins and returned the excess. "We are poor," she said. "We are not a lesson you may purchase." That afternoon, Esther unlocked the old storage room where discarded academy uniforms and hat boxes were kept. Dust lay over 20 years of changing sleeves, collars, and brims. She searched until her gloves turned gray. She found the dark green headmistress's hat in a box labeled 1896. Its crown had collapsed. The ribbon was spotted. Beneath the sweatband, where no wearer would look, tiny stitches formed a swallow with one wing unfinished. Esther sat among the boxes and traced the thread. The mark was not evidence that Nora had been a good mother. It did not erase absence, loneliness, or the years Esther had waited beside windows she no longer remembered. It proved only that the absent woman had touched the things nearest her. Yet the difference between being forgotten and being loved without reach was not small. It shifted the weight of an entire childhood. Clara Lyle, the youngest literature teacher, found Esther there after supper. Clara was 28, sharp-featured and the daughter of a Worcester typesetter. She had been the first faculty member to support Birdie's admission. She asked whether Esther was ill. Esther showed her the stitches. The story came out unevenly. Esther did not mention every detail. She said enough for Clara to understand. Clara listened and then asked a question no one else had asked. "What do you want from her now?" Esther had thought about truth, proof, blame, the academy, Lavinia, and Birdie. She had not thought about desire. Wanting was a childish exposure.
It gave another person the means to refuse. I do not know. Clara folded the spoiled ribbon back into the box.
Then perhaps begin by wanting something for the girl you can still help.
The words were not profound. They were useful. Esther arranged for Birdie to attend Clara's evening lessons privately, at no charge. She called it preparation for the state examination, not academy enrollment. Miriam Cole supplied books. The lessons took place in the map room after day pupils left. Birdie accepted only after learning 2 other factory girls could attend. For 6 weeks, the arrangement survived in secrecy. Secrecy altered everyone inside it. Clara became nervous around trustees. Alice hid her drawings behind maps. Birdie entered through the service door. Esther found herself listening for Charles's carriage as if she were committing theft. She understood then that a kindness forced to hide could teach shame as efficiently as cruelty. She also understood how Nora might have stood outside her life for years, making small roads because the front door remained guarded.
In October, the Academy hosted its annual autumn reception. The event was not a charity supper. It was worse. A display of cultivated daughters to cultivated donors, with string music, recitations, and tables of student work arranged beneath gas chandeliers. The new East Wing plans stood on an easel. Charles intended to announce his engagement to Esther after the senior chorus. He informed her of this 2 days beforehand. Esther said she had not consented to an announcement. Charles answered that their understanding had been plain for months, and that hesitation now would invite speculation already encouraged by Nora's appearance. Marriage would quiet the town and stabilize the board. Am I to marry you as a woman or as an explanation? Esther asked. He smiled with the patience he used on Alice. You are overtired. Esther thought of Nora's words about cages that continued feeding a person. She said there would be no announcement. Charles did not argue. He asked whether her answer was final. She said it was final for the reception. He bowed and left. The distinction between postponement and refusal shamed her. Even now she had protected the door back into safety. Birdie and 2 women from the evening room had been hired to assist the Academy seamstress before the reception. They pressed sashes, repaired torn gloves, and reshaped several hats damaged by rain. Nora came only to deliver a small steaming kettle and additional blocks. She worked in the service room for an hour without entering the public halls. Esther watched from the doorway as Nora stretched damp felt over a crown. Her scarred face bent close to the steam. She fixed the material with cord, working left-handed when the tremor in her right grew severe. Is that from the mercury? Esther asked. Nora did not look up. Some of it. What is the rest? Age, anger, holding too tightly to tools. Esther asked why she still worked if the trade had harmed her. Nora said people often survived by the same work that damaged them. The answer applied to more than hatting, and both women knew it. On the work table lay Cordelia Ames's enormous reception hat, trimmed with bronze velvet. Its pearl pin had been removed and placed beside a pincushion. Nora told Esther the clasp was loose. Birdie would carry it upstairs separately so it would not be lost. Esther nodded and returned to the assembly hall. Guests arrived at 7. Rain shone on carriages. The Academy glowed from every window. Girls in blue and white moved between exhibits, while a trio played near the palms. The evening began beautifully. Alice's architectural drawing of a worker's bathhouse hung anonymously among the advanced art pieces. Esther had persuaded the instructor to include it without naming the artist. Its strong lines attracted more attention than the expected watercolors of roses. Alice stood at a distance, trying not to smile. Birdie remained near the cloakroom, paid help in a plain dress. Cordelia Ames discovered the missing pearl pin shortly before the chorus. Her cry stopped conversations in 3 rooms. The pin had belonged to her mother. It was valuable not only for the pearl, but for the small diamond set into the head.
She insisted it had been in her hat when she arrived. The academy doors were quietly closed. Servants were questioned. Cloaks were searched with embarrassed politeness. Charles took command and transformed panic into procedure. Then one of the maids said she had seen Birdie carrying something bright from the service room. All eyes found the girl. Birdie explained that Nora had given her the loose pin to deliver. Cordelia denied receiving it. Birdie said she had placed it in a folded handkerchief inside her work basket until Mrs. Ames came upstairs. The basket was brought from the cloakroom. The handkerchief was there. The pin was not. Charles asked Birdie to empty her pockets.
The girl looked toward Esther. It was the same look she had given in the vestibule, but now it contained a terrible remnant of trust. Esther was the person who had seen Nora set the pin beside the pincushion. She knew Birdie's account began in truth. She could have stopped the spectacle. Instead, she saw the donors, the East Wing plans, Lavinia's white face, and Charles waiting to learn whether she would protect the school. She told Birdie that cooperation would clear the matter quickly. The girl removed a key, 2 pennies, a pencil stub, and a piece of blue chalk. Nothing more. Cordelia demanded the carpetbag Nora had brought. A servant fetched it from the workroom. Inside, beneath folds of black veiling, lay the pearl hatpin. The room filled with a sound softer than speech and more destructive. Satisfaction. Lavinia closed her eyes. Birdie went very still. She did not take it. Charles instructed a footman to summon a constable. Esther remembered a pearl and onyx brooch found beneath a child's nightdress in another bag. She remembered Martha saying she had not seen a hand. She remembered Nora's warning that promises changed inside rooms where poor women were not permitted to speak. History had not returned disguised. It had walked into the same family carrying the same accusation, trusting Esther to recognize it. Yet recognition did not make courage automatic. Esther asked everyone to remain calm. She said the object had been found, not the act witnessed. Charles replied that Nora's history made the inference plain. Birdie shouted that Nora had no history of theft except the lie told by the Vale family. The constable arrived before Nora did. Someone had sent to Cinder Street without Esther's knowledge. Nora entered the assembly hall wet from the rain, her breath short from climbing the hill. She saw the open carpetbag, Cordelia's pin in Charles's hand, and Birdie surrounded by women in silk. Understanding crossed her scarred face without surprise. Charles asked whether she denied taking the pin. Nora said she denied it. She had placed it on the service table and told Birdie to carry it. After that, the carpetbag had been unattended. Raymond Vale stood near the East Wing plans. He said he had passed the service room and seen no one except Nora and Birdie. Esther noticed a line of blue chalk across his cuff. It could have come from the school. Half the classrooms used blue chalk for diagrams. It proved nothing. But Raymond had also been in the library when Lavinia warned Esther to be careful. He managed the storage building where old evidence might remain. He had learned from his father how a found object could end an inconvenient woman's credibility. Esther asked whether he had touched the carpetbag. Raymond laughed. "Surely you cannot mean to question me in front of servants." The offense in his voice depended entirely on the belief that some people were naturally questioned and others were not. Esther turned to the constable. "No one will be taken from this house tonight." Charles said the decision was not hers. "It is my academy. It belongs to the trust. Then the trust may dismiss me tomorrow. Tonight, no woman will be arrested because an object appeared in her bag while half this building stood open." Cordelia accused Esther of protecting her mother at the expense of an innocent guest. The word "mother" traveled through the hall. Nora looked at Esther for the first time. This was the moment Esther could have reclaimed the name she had denied. She could have crossed the room. She could have said that the scarred woman was Lenora Hale.
that whatever else remained uncertain, she would not permit the old cruelty to repeat. She managed only, "Mrs. Bell is entitled to the same presumption you would demand for yourself." It was just.
It was also smaller than the truth. Birdie heard the difference. She walked to the display of Academy principles printed in gold for the Jubilee. Before anyone could stop her, she tore down the panel bearing the word courage. Then she took Nora's arm, and together they left through the front doors into the rain. The constable did not follow. Miriam Cole and Clara Lyle stood beside Esther. No one else did. Charles ended the reception early. In the headmistress's office, he demanded Esther's resignation. He spoke with controlled grief, as if she had compelled him to perform a painful duty. She had humiliated donors, obstructed the law, and allowed a family disturbance to infect the school. He would give her until morning to resign for reasons of health. Lavinia sat near the desk, both hands on her cane. She looked not triumphant, but stricken. Esther asked whether she supported him. Her aunt said the academy must survive. "Without me?" "If you force that choice." The answer cut more cleanly than Esther expected. She had known all evening that the school could be used against her. She had not known Lavinia would use it so soon. Charles placed a typed letter on the desk. Esther did not sign it. She asked him to leave her office. When he refused, she rang for the porter and instructed him to show Mr. Pritchard out. Charles stared at her, as if an object he owned had spoken. At the door, he said Alice would not return to the academy. "That punishment is for her, not me," Esther replied. He left anyway. Lavinia remained. For several minutes neither woman spoke. Rain rattled the windows. Downstairs, servants dismantled the reception. Somewhere in the corridor, a pupil was crying. Esther removed the 7 swallows from her desk and arranged them in a line. "Did you know she sent these?" Lavinia looked at the earliest bird. "Some." "Did you burn them?" "Some." "Why?" "Because you woke screaming after she came to the gate." Because every appearance undid months of peace. Because love that cannot provide safety is sometimes only another appetite. The conviction in Lavinia's voice was real. So was the cruelty. Esther asked whether safety meant never being permitted to know who had paid for it. Lavinia rose with difficulty. "When you have raised a child from terror to respectability, you may judge my methods." "You raised me from one terror by teaching me another." Her aunt stopped at the door. Esther continued. She said Lavinia had taught her that love disappeared when she failed to be useful, calm, and grateful. She had spent 30 years mistaking obedience for belonging. Tonight, when Birdie needed protection, Esther had nearly offered the same bargain. Submit to humiliation so the room might remain comfortable. Lavinia's shoulders bent. For once, she did not answer. She left the office without the swallows. Esther sat alone until dawn, with no fiancé, perhaps no position, and a truth she had defended only halfway. At sunrise, she found one more thing beneath the reception debris. The pearl hatpin's loose clasp lay caught in the velvet underside of Cordelia's hat. The long pin could not have remained secured during the carriage ride without it. Someone had removed the clasp in the service room after the hat arrived. The discovery did not identify who placed the pin in Nora's bag. It proved the theft had been arranged inside the academy. By 8 the next morning, the trustees had suspended Esther pending an inquiry. Charles sent the notice by messenger. It allowed her to remain in the residence for 1 week, but forbade her to conduct classes or communicate with pupils on academy matters. Reverend Sloane would act as principal. The language was courteous, impersonal, and complete. Esther read it twice, folded it, and went to the map room. Alice's portfolio was gone. Only a torn corner of grey paper remained beneath the cabinet. It showed 3 charcoal fingers curved around the handle of a carpet bag. A line of blue marked the cuff above them. Esther stood very still. Alice drew what other people did not consider worthy of seeing. Hands at machines, roof drains, a girl asleep over a book, the bent back of a servant carrying coal. If she had been in the service corridor before the reception, she might have noticed what everyone else missed. Charles had taken her home before demanding Esther's resignation. He might already have destroyed the portfolio. Esther put the torn drawing in her pocket and carried Cordelia's loose clasp to Cinder Street. The evening room door was locked. A notice announced that classes were cancelled. At the bottom of the stairs, the cooper said Nora had gone to Keen's finishing shop, and Birdie had not been seen since the previous night. Esther found Nora at a side entrance of the factory, waiting with a tin cup while the company doctor examined women from the trimming floor. The scarred woman looked as if she had not slept. Esther showed her the clasp and explained what it meant. Nora listened. "It proves Birdie told the truth. I know. She knew before you did." Esther accepted the blow. She said she wanted to apologize to the girl. Nora told her Birdie had left at dawn. She had taken a train to Bridgeport, where Thomas Bell's sister might find work for her in a ribbon warehouse. Nora had asked her to wait. Birdie answered that she would not remain in a town that searched poor women for the comfort of rich ones. "Can you blame her?" Nora asked. "No." The ease of the answer seemed to disarm them both. Esther said she had seen Nora place the pin on the work table. When the bag was searched, she should have stated that plainly and stood beside her. She had hidden behind procedure because procedure allowed cowardice to dress itself as fairness. Nora's visible eye filled, but no tears fell. "You stopped the constable," she said, "after I let them empty a child's pockets. Both things are true." Martha had said the same about Lavinia's love and cruelty. Esther wondered whether this refusal to simplify pain was something sisters shared. She told Nora about Alice's drawing and the blue chalk on Raymond's cuff. Nora looked toward the factory windows. Women's faces moved behind damp glass. She said Raymond had been 8 when the pearl brooch appeared in her bag. On the morning she left Bellwether, he watched from the upper landing. He had been crying. For years, Nora assumed he cried because of the quarrel. Later, when Thomas Bell urged her to remember every detail, she recalled black polish on the child's fingers, the same polish used on Lavinia's jewelry box. "You believe Silas used his son?" Esther asked. "I believe men who call themselves protectors often make children carry the dirt." Raymond might have lived 30 years with knowledge no one else possessed. The possibility explained his nervous offer to inspect the storage building and the warning hidden inside Lavinia's face. Esther asked Nora to come with her. "Where?" "To hear him tell us which history he repeated." Nora shook her head. She had spent too much of her life entering veil rooms to defend what they had already decided. If Esther wanted the truth, she would have to obtain it without using her mother as bait. The word mother was spoken without emphasis. It entered Esther more deeply than accusation. Before she left, she asked Nora what name she had called her besides Essie. Nora's hand tightened around the tin cup. "Little Wren," she said. "You talked before sunrise and never stayed where I put you." Wren. The missing name opened another room in Esther's memory. Her mother's skirt formed a tent around her beneath the kitchen table. Daniel's boots crossed the floor. Someone said the little wren had built a nest in the flour sack. Esther felt, for one impossible moment, the security of belonging to people who had not yet been divided. She thanked Nora. It was not enough. It was what she had. Raymond did not answer at the Vale House. Lavinia had spent the night there and refused to receive Esther. A maid said Mr. Vale had gone to the old storage building near the river. Esther hired a cab and arrived as 2 laborers were loading crates onto a wagon. The building had once served as the pattern shop for veil finishing works. Its high windows were opaque with grime. Inside, rows of shelves held hat presses, molds, rusted tools, bundles of wire forms, and machinery too obsolete to sell. The air smelled of dust and old shellac. Raymond stood beside a packing case, feeding papers into a small iron stove.
Esther crossed the room and shut the stove door before he could add another bundle. He said the contents belonged to the Veil Company. She had no authority there. Neither did you at the Academy service table. His face went slack, then recovered. Esther showed him the fragment of Alice's drawing. It did not prove an act. It proved a witness had seen his hand where he denied being. Raymond said Alice sketched inventions. Esther agreed. She also said Cordelia's clasp had been removed deliberately and that a blue chalk line marked his cuff. If he preferred, they could place the questions before the trustees, the constable, Cordelia, and the Gazette. "Or you can tell me why," she said. Raymond sat on a crate. He looked older than his 51 years. For decades, he had occupied rooms maintained by his father's certainty. Without it, he seemed a frightened boy in a good coat. He admitted moving the hat pin. He had not meant for Nora to be arrested, he said. He expected the object to be discovered, the Academy to dismiss Birdie, and Nora to lose the sympathy gained at the Jubilee. Cordelia would recover her property. The family name would survive. No real harm was intended. Esther heard Silas Vale's reasoning alive inside his son. Harm existed only when it reached people whose comfort counted. "Did you place the brooch in the Nora's bag?" Raymond began to deny it. Then his eyes moved to the child's block, which Esther had carried beneath her arm without thinking. The unfinished swallow faced him. He had owned a carved bird once, he said. Daniel made it for him during a winter when Silas was too busy to notice his son. A small maple bird with wings that rocked when placed on a table. Raymond followed Daniel through the pattern shop and believed him capable of making anything safe. On the day Lenora returned from Bridgeport, Silas gave Raymond the brooch. He said Lenora had stolen before and needed to be taught that the family saw through her. The boy was to hide it in her bag while the adults argued. His father promised it would prevent Lenora from taking Esther into hunger and disgrace. Raymond obeyed. After Lenora left, he asked when she would return. Silas struck him and said a man did not whine over necessary work. "I was 8, Raymond said. "You were 51 when you touched Cordelia's pin." His face crumpled. Esther felt no triumph. She saw a child used as an instrument, then a man who had spent his life turning the same handle, because admitting the first act would destroy the father he still feared. Raymond gestured toward the burning stove. The papers were old reports from the works. Most concerned equipment. After the Jubilee, he had searched the storage room and found a cracked brass housing from the pressure assembly that exploded in 1879. A metal tag remained wired to it. Daniel Hale's initials and the date of his warning had been scratched into the tag 3 weeks before his death. Silas had kept the damaged part rather than discard it, perhaps because guilt could become possessive. The housing lay in the open packing case. It was heavy, blackened, and ugly. No courtroom could punish a dead owner for a 30-year-old lie. No piece of brass could return Daniel. Yet it ended the claim that he had caused the explosion through recklessness. He had marked the danger. Someone with authority had ignored him. Esther asked Raymond why he had not destroyed it immediately. He said he had meant to. Then he saw Daniel's initials and remembered the wooden bird rocking on a workbench. For 3 days, he moved the part from shelf to crate and back again. "I thought if the Academy rejected the girl, Mrs. Bell might leave matters buried." "So you buried her under the same lie?" He covered his face. Esther told him he would write 2 statements in his own hand.
One would describe the brooch, the other would describe the hatpin. He would give copies to Nora, Birdie, Cordelia, Lavinia, and every Academy trustee. If he omitted any material fact, Esther would take the brass housing and Alice's drawing to the Gazette. Raymond stared at her. "You would ruin the name that fed you." "The name fed me by starving someone else." For the first time, the sentence did not feel like ingratitude. It felt like measure. Raymond wrote. He paused often. The stove ticked as it cooled. Outside, wagon wheels ground through mud. Esther watched a man set down a burden he had chosen to carry long after childhood stopped excusing its weight. When he finished, he asked what would happen to him. Esther said Cordelia would decide whether to make a complaint about the pin. Nora would decide what to do with the older confession. The Vale Company and the trustees would decide the rest. Consequences were not persecution, merely because they reached him. She took the statements and the brass housing. At the door, Raymond asked whether she remembered Daniel. "In pieces," she said. Raymond nodded toward the hat block. "He always left one mark unfinished. Said the owner should add something, or the object would spend its life belonging only to the maker." Esther looked at the swallow's shortened wing. For 30 years, everyone had treated it as damage. Birdie returned to Bellwether 2 days later. Thomas Bell's sister had sent a telegram to Nora, saying the girl arrived safely, but refused to remain after learning Nora was ill. The illness proved to be exhaustion, not fever. Birdie came back angry at the world, and most angry at herself for caring. Esther went to the evening room before the girl could be brought to the academy or displayed before trustees. She found Birdie scrubbing chalk from the tables. Nora sat by the stove with a blanket around her shoulders. Several women were present, but Esther did not ask them to leave. She gave Birdie Raymond's statement. The girl read slowly. When she reached the description of the hatpin, her mouth trembled. She handed the pages to Nora without speaking. Esther apologized. She did not say mistakes were made. She did not blame donors, Charles, Lavinia, the academy, or the habits of her upbringing. She said that she had known enough to stop the search and had allowed it because Birdie's humiliation seemed, for several cowardly minutes, less dangerous than the disapproval of rich people. She said she had used fairness as a shield after failing to offer loyalty. She asked no forgiveness. Birdie kept washing the same clean patch of table. At last, she asked why Esther had come there instead of apologizing at the academy where the accusation occurred. "Because I wished to ask first what repair would look like to you." The girl considered this. She wanted the Gazette to print Raymond's confession beside the earlier account of the confused factory widow. She wanted every servant searched that night to receive a written apology. She wanted the academy to state that she had qualified for admission and had been rejected for reasons unrelated to scholarship. She wanted no special language about rescue, charity, or promising poverty. "And I want to enter through the front door," she said. Esther agreed to every condition. Birdie looked almost disappointed. Anger had prepared her for resistance. "The trustees may remove me before I can fulfill them," Esther said. "If they do, I will state publicly why." "Would you have done that if Mr. Vale had not confessed?" The truthful answer cost Esther. "I do not know." Birdie nodded. "That is the first thing you have said that I believe without wanting to." Nora had read both statements. Her hands rested on the pages. She did not weep over the proof of Daniel's warning or Raymond's admission. She said she had imagined vindication so often that she expected it to feel like a door opening. Instead, it felt like learning the door had never been locked. People had simply stood against it. Esther sat across from her. "I was one of them." "Yes." Again, no softening. Again, relief inside the pain.
Esther placed the 7 swallows from Martha's tin on the table. She said she was sorry they had been hidden. Nora touched each one by year. She remembered the wood used, the room where she carved it, sometimes the weather. For Esther's 12th birthday, she had worked in a shop above a fish market. At 17, she lived in one room with Thomas Bell's mother. At 24, she had married Thomas. At 25, she stood outside the hall where Esther gave her headmistress speech and went home before the applause ended. "Did you hate me?" Esther asked. Nora answered carefully. She had hated the woman Esther appeared to be in newspapers, grateful, polished, certain that poverty revealed character. She had hated hearing her own child repeat Lavinia's judgment. But hatred at a distance and love at close range had occupied her together. Human hearts were untidy houses. Why did you not expose them? With what? A scar? A story? The word of a trimmer against Silas Vale? Nora glanced at Raymond's confession. And later, when you had the power to listen, you were standing inside the life I would have exposed. I told myself silence protected you. Some years that was true. Some years I was afraid you would deny me again. They sat with the equal weight of both failures. Esther wanted to reach across the table. She did not. A daughter denied for 29 years had no right to demand that the mother make reunion easy. She asked whether Nora would attend the trustees' inquiry. Nora refused. She would provide the statement concerning Daniel and the brooch. She would not stand in another veil room while people judged whether her motherhood was respectable enough to exist. Birdie said she would attend if invited through the front door.
"Then I will meet you there," Esther said. The inquiry was held on a Saturday in the Academy Assembly Hall because too many townspeople wished to attend for the library to contain them. Charles had intended a closed meeting. Miriam Cole sent copies of Raymond's statements to the Gazette and announced the time to parents. By noon, the front steps were crowded with factory families, Academy alumni, donors, teachers, reporters, and girls who had been instructed to remain in the dormitory but discovered reasons to cross the gallery. Birdie entered through the main doors beside Clara Lyle. She wore the same brown dress she had worn at the Jubilee. Its hem had been let down again, leaving a pale line above the new stitching. Esther waited in the vestibule and opened the inner door herself. No applause greeted them. Esther was glad. Birdie was not an emblem. She was a girl entering a school. Charles sat at the center table with the trustees. Alice's chair in the audience was empty.
Lavinia had not arrived. Cordelia Ames spoke first. She confirmed that her hatpin had been recovered and read Raymond's confession. She said she would not seek his imprisonment, partly because of family feeling, and partly because public proceedings would prolong a disgrace. She apologized to Nora and Birdie, though neither was present to receive it. Her voice became quieter when she admitted she'd been eager to believe the accusation. The trustees accepted Raymond's resignation from the board of the Vale Company and every civic committee he held. His absence occupied the room like an unclaimed seat. Then Charles addressed Esther's conduct. He said the truth about the pin did not excuse a headmistress who obstructed a constable, concealed unauthorized classes, compromised the academy with labor agitation, and allowed a painful family history to govern institutional decisions. The school needed steadiness. He recommended Esther's permanent removal and Birdie's admission deferred until another principal could review the matter without bias. His logic was orderly. It placed every revealed wrong in a separate drawer, so none could alter the furniture. Esther was invited to respond. She walked to the lectern, where weeks earlier she had praised truth before denying the woman who carried it. Her prepared pages remained folded in her pocket. She began with Birdie. She said Beatrice Bell had qualified with distinction. The Academy had broken its promise because donors objected to the opinions and class of the woman who raised her. Esther had permitted the delay, signed the procedures, and failed to name the prejudice. During the reception,
She had allowed the girl's pockets to be emptied in public, although she knew Birdie's account of the pin began truthfully. Whatever the trustees decided about the headmistress, Birdie's admission should be immediate, unconditional, and recorded without the language of charity. The factory families in the rear stood very still. Esther, then named Nora. "The woman who came to our jubilee was not an impostor, a confused widow, or no one connected with this academy. She was born Lenora Vale. She became Lenora Hale when she married my father, Daniel Hale. She is now Nora Bell. She is my mother." The words did not produce thunder. A baby fussed in the back row. Someone shifted a chair. Yet Esther felt the structure of her life move around them. She told the room she had denied Nora because the truth threatened her position, and because the person who raised her had taught her to confuse respectability with safety. She did not excuse herself as a frightened child. At 37, she had repeated the cruelty once done to her mother.
The academy could not teach girls courage while rewarding its headmistress for cowardice. Charles interrupted. He said the inquiry concerned governance, not public confession. "Governance is what we call our private character after it acquires keys," Esther replied. The gallery stirred. She read the portion of Raymond's statement describing the planted brooch and the damaged pressure housing. She did not accuse every factory owner or turn Daniel into a saint. She said only that the family story used to separate mother and child had been built on a deliberate act. Lavinia had raised Esther with devotion and denied Nora with equal determination. Both truths would remain true, even if one made gratitude less comfortable. At that moment, the rear doors opened. Lavinia entered alone. She wore black, though no one had died. Without a maid or Raymond's arm, the walk down the aisle took time. People moved aside. Her cane struck the floor with the old authority, but each step seemed to spend some of it. Esther stopped speaking. Lavinia reached the front and asked to address the trustees. Charles objected that she was not a board member. Miriam Cole observed that no one had remembered this fact while accepting her conditions on the East Wing. Lavinia faced the hall. She said Raymond's confession was true. She had not known in 1879 that Silas ordered the boy to plant the brooch. She had suspected the accusation was convenient and chose not to examine that suspicion. Later, Martha told her Lenora continued sending carved birds. Lavinia destroyed some and concealed others. No messenger ever reported Lenora's death. Lavinia invented that report after Esther's 11th birthday because the child had begun asking when her mother would return. A sound escaped Esther. Not a word. The broken beginning of one. Lavinia gripped her cane. She said she had believed herself justified. Lenora possessed courage, but no money. Lavinia possessed money, but had spent her marriage learning how little authority it bought inside her own house. After Daniel's death, she saw one way to save Esther from factory rooms, rented beds, and a future determined by wages. Each lie made the next necessary. Each year Esther flourished appeared to prove the first cruelty wise. "I loved the child," Lavinia said. "I loved her so fearfully that I made gratitude the rent she paid for being mine." Her voice failed. No one moved to help her. Esther wanted to. Esther wanted not to. Both desires held her in place. Lavinia announced that she was withdrawing her condition on the East Wing. The gift would proceed regardless of Birdie's admission or Esther's position. She would also resign from every informal privilege at the academy. She did not ask the hall, Nora, or Esther to forgive her. "Forgiveness demanded in public is only another payment," she said. Then she sat in the nearest chair. Charles called for order. The trustees retired to the library. The audience waited nearly 2 hours. Factory women shared sandwiches with academy alumni who had never before sat beside them. Pupils leaned over the gallery rail.
Lavinia remained alone at the front until Martha Price entered and took a chair 3 seats away. They did not speak. Esther stood near Birdie. The girl asked whether the speech had been intended to save Esther's post. "Partly," Esther said. "I am not free of wanting it." Birdie approved of the answer with the smallest nod. When the trustees returned, Charles's face revealed the decision before he spoke. Birdie was admitted by unanimous vote. Esther was reinstated by 5 votes to 4, subject to a revised charter limiting any single donor's influence. Miriam Cole would replace Charles as chair. Evening instruction for working women would be studied, which was the sort of promise institutions made when they hoped time would weaken demand. Charles resigned. Before leaving, he came to Esther. He said she had chosen a spectacle over a future with him. Esther looked at Alice's empty chair. "You chose my future without asking me to inhabit it," she said. He answered that Alice would be educated at home from then on and forbidden all contact with Bellwether. Esther asked whether he meant to punish his daughter for drawing the truth. His eyes moved to the charcoal fragment in her hand. Until then, he had not known what Alice saw. Fear crossed his face, not fear of Raymond or scandal, but of a child developing a judgment he could not arrange. He left without replying. The inquiry ended after dusk. Outside, factory whistles sounded the night shift. Birdie stood at the academy gate with her admission certificate newly signed. She did not tear this one. Nora waited across the street. She had refused the hall, not the girl. Esther walked down the steps. For one hopeful second, she imagined all 3 of them meeting beneath the gate, pain resolved by truth. Instead, Birdie ran to Nora, and Nora held her with the unguarded force Esther had once believed the woman incapable of giving. Esther stopped several yards away. Nora saw her. She did not open the embrace to include her. She did not turn away. It was not reconciliation. It was permission to remain visible. For that night, it was enough. Truth did not clean Bellwether by Monday. 2 donors withdrew annual prizes. 3 parents removed daughters from the academy, saying factory politics had entered the classroom. The Gazette printed Raymond's confession and Lavinia's statement, then spent a week publishing letters about whether old wrongs should be disturbed. One writer argued that Esther Hale had behaved unwomanly by speaking to a reporter after her husband's death. Another asked how womanly she was expected to behave with glass embedded in her face. The East Wing builders returned to work. Birdie began classes in October. She entered through the front doors each morning and sat in the second row of Clara Lyle's room. Some girls avoided her. Others asked questions about Cinder Street as if it were a foreign nation. Birdie answered the respectful ones and ignored the rest. She was not grateful in the manner donors preferred. She was diligent, impatient, funny when she forgot to defend herself, and poor at music. She continued teaching arithmetic at the evening room twice a week. Esther did not stop her. Instead, she opened the Academy's West classroom 3 evenings each week. The trustees were still studying the question when 12 factory women arrived for the first lesson, followed by 6 laundresses, 2 shop girls, a widow who wanted to read her son's letters without help, and 1 man, embarrassed to admit he could not calculate interest. Faced with actual students sitting at academy desks, the board approved a temporary winter course. Temporary arrangements had built half the permanent world. Nora did not teach there. She sent women up the hill and remained at the evening room, where some felt safer. Her name appeared on no academy committee. Esther had learned that repair did not require absorbing another person's work and calling it inclusion. For a month, mother and daughter communicated through Birdie about practical matters. Nora needed lamp oil for evening classes. Esther needed a reliable finisher for the girls' winter hats. Birdie carried messages with theatrical annoyance. Then Esther went to Cinder Street on a Tuesday with no question to ask. Nora was alone in the workroom, steaming brown felt over the kettle. She did not seem surprised. Esther offered to help. Nora gave her an apron and showed her how to draw the damp crown over a wooden block without pulling the grain crooked. Esther's first attempt wrinkled above the brim. The second leaned to one side. Years of managing a school had not trained her fingers to persuade felt. Nora corrected her grip. Her trembling right hand rested briefly over Esther's. Neither woman remarked upon it. They worked for an hour. Nora spoke about Daniel in small pieces. He sang badly, sharpened knives beautifully, and believed every object should reveal how it had been made. He let Esther play with shavings beneath his bench and once carved 12 buttons because she swallowed one and Lenora panicked over the missing set. Esther spoke about the years Nora had not seen, her first prize in rhetoric, her scarlet fever, the day Lavinia told her she would never marry if she frightened men with opinions, the first teacher she dismissed, the pupil whose death from pneumonia made her sit outside the dormitory every winter night for 3 years, listening for coughs. They did not compare suffering. They exchanged missing rooms. Before Esther left, she asked whether she might return. Nora said Tuesday was the quietest afternoon. It was not an embrace. It was a place in the week. Lavinia withdrew to the Vale House and received almost no one. Her gift continued as promised, but her name was removed from the East Wing at her own instruction. Bellwether disliked this. The town understood punishment better when it could be engraved. Esther visited after 6 weeks. She found Lavinia in the small morning room overlooking a dead garden. Without board papers, household instructions, or the academy calendar, her aunt seemed diminished, but not gentle. Power had been her posture so long that even solitude sat straight. On the table lay the child's wooden hat block. Esther had not realized it was missing from her office. Lavinia admitted taking it after the inquiry. She had not meant to keep it. She wanted to understand why a rough object had accomplished what years of accusation could not. "Because it knew my name," Esther said. Lavinia looked at the inscription beneath the base. "I knew every name you were called." "You knew them in order to remove them." The old woman accepted this. She brought out a parcel wrapped in tissue. Inside was a child's red wool coat, too small for any living pupil. One brass button was missing. Esther remembered pressing her face into that coat when winter wind crossed the academy yard. Lavinia had kept it for 30 years. "I do not show you this as proof that I was good," she said. "I have learned what objects cannot prove." Esther sat opposite her. She asked the question that had lived beneath every other one. If Lavinia had known Nora was alive and had known where she worked, why had she never allowed even a supervised meeting? Lavinia took a long time to answer. At first, she feared Lenora would take Esther into poverty. Later, she feared Esther would love Lenora more. By the time Esther was old enough to choose, Lavinia feared the girl would judge the lies and leave. Every year of concealment increased the loss that truth might cause. She kept waiting for a safe time to confess, meaning a time when confession would cost nothing. "There was no such time," Esther said. "No." Lavinia's eyes filled. "I made you my daughter by teaching you that your mother was unworthy. Then I needed her to remain unworthy, or I did not know what that made me." Esther understood. Understanding was not forgiveness. It did, however, return Lavinia from the shape of a monster to the harder shape of a woman who had chosen harm repeatedly and called each choice love. Lavinia asked whether Nora would ever see her. "That is not mine to arrange." "Would you ask?" "No." The refusal hurt them both. Esther let it stand. She took the hat block and left the red coat. At the door, Lavinia asked whether Esther would visit again. Esther said she did not know. It was the truth. Lavinia nodded, as if truth, even unwelcome, was a form of mercy she had not practiced. Winter settled hard over Connecticut. Coal prices rose. The still river froze at the edges. Girls crossed the academy lawn with scarves over their mouths, while factory smoke flattened beneath the clouds. Alice Pritchard did not return to school. For 2 months, Esther heard nothing. Then a roll of drawings arrived without a return address. They showed the Pritchard house from inside. The kitchen range, a locked cabinet, Charles's hat hanging above a desk, a girl's hand reaching toward a window latch. The final drawing depicted Bellwether's cupola seen from a distant bedroom. Esther wrote to Alice. Charles returned the letter unopened. She could not claim a right to his child. She could not break into his house or turn Alice into another field on which adults fought for moral victory.
She sent drawing paper through the Academy art instructor's sister, who attended the Pritchards' church in New Haven. She included no note. In January, Charles appeared at the Academy. He looked tired. He said Alice had stopped eating breakfast and refused to draw, even when he returned her pencils. A physician found no disease. Charles spoke as if stubbornness were an illness Esther had caused. She said Alice needed to be heard. He asked Esther to speak with her. "Will you allow her to return here if she wishes?" Charles resisted. Esther waited. At last he agreed to 1 term as a day pupil, provided her work remained proper. Esther said Alice's work would be judged by the art instructor, not by him. He nearly left. Then he agreed again. It was not transformation. It was a father choosing his child's visible pain over his own certainty by the smallest possible margin. Esther knew small margins could widen. Alice returned in February. She did not thank Esther. She placed a new drawing in the map-room cabinet. 2 women seated on opposite sides of a work table, both looking at a wooden block between them. One woman had a scar. The other had Esther's hands. "You have never seen us together," Esther said. Alice answered that seeing was not limited to being present. Esther hung the drawing in her office. By spring, the east wing walls had risen above the hedges. The academy held no grand ceremony for the cornerstone. Esther had lost her taste for platforms decorated with declarations. Pupils, teachers, builders, evening students and townspeople gathered on a windy Saturday. Each group placed one ordinary object inside a copper box before it was sealed into the wall. The day pupils chose a fountain pen. The evening students chose a worn primer with 20 names written on its first page. The builders contributed a square and a plumb line. Birdie placed the torn halves of her first examination certificate, joined with plain thread. Esther placed nothing. The academy did not need another object burdened with the duty of proving her virtue. Nora watched from the edge of the crowd. She had begun lifting her veil more often, though never because others asked. The tremor in her hand had worsened. She now allowed younger women to perform most steaming and blocking, while she taught trimming and repair. After the box was sealed, Lavinia's carriage stopped beyond the gate. The old woman did not descend. She watched through the open door. Nora saw her. For several seconds, the sisters faced each other across the lawn, separated by pupils, laborers, smoke, and 29 years. Lavinia inclined her head. Nora did not return the gesture. She did not turn away either. The carriage left. Esther made no attempt to interpret the exchange. Too much of their suffering had come from other people deciding what their silence meant. Birdie completed her first academy year at the top of her class in mathematics and near the bottom in music. She planned to become a teacher, then changed her mind and announced she wanted to study engineering. When a trustee laughed, Alice asked him which bridge he had built. The laughter ended. The winter evening courses became the Bellwether Extension School. It charged those who could pay
and asked no public gratitude from those who could not. Clara Lyle directed it with more energy than diplomacy. Nora served on its advisory circle only after the word ladies was removed from the title, since 2 male factory hands attended arithmetic. Esther remained headmistress. She was not suddenly warm. She still inspected ribbons, heard whispers through doors, and returned essays covered in firm red corrections. But she began asking pupils what they meant before telling them what their words appeared to mean. She noticed how often rules protected comfort instead of learning. Some rules survived the examination, others did not. Every Tuesday, she went to Cinder Street. She and Nora learned one another slowly. There were bad weeks. Once Esther asked why Nora had not fought harder, and Nora ordered her out of the workroom. Once Nora dismissed every good memory Esther shared about Lavinia, and Esther refused to return for a month. Birdie carried no messages between them during quarrels. She said women over 37 could manage their own disasters. They did. Esther came back. Nora apologized for trying to make love exclusive. Esther apologized for measuring a powerless woman's courage against fantasies formed in safety. They discovered differences that had nothing to do with tragedy. Nora sweetened tea until the spoon stood upright. Esther disliked sugar. Nora loved serialized romances and hid them inside newspapers. Esther preferred histories and found most fictional heroines exhausting. Both women hated organ music and pretended otherwise at church. Ordinary knowledge did what revelation could not. It made relationship possible after truth made it necessary. One June afternoon, Nora set the child's hat block on the work table. The wood had dried and cracked slightly near the base. The swallow still carried one finished wing, and one wing shortened at the first feathers. Nora brought out Daniel's smallest carving knife. She'd kept it wrapped in oiled cloth through every lodging, marriage, winter, and move. "Raymond told you why the wing was unfinished," she said. Esther nodded. Nora placed the knife in her hand. Esther had delivered speeches to hundreds without fear. The small blade frightened her. One careless pressure could scar the only object both parents had touched for her. Nora showed her how to hold it. The tremor passed from the older woman's fingers into the younger woman's hand, or perhaps Esther supplied her own. She cut the first line too deep. The second wandered. The third found the curve of the wing. Together they added 4 imperfect feathers. They did not match Daniel's work. They did not hide the 30-year pause between one hand and another. The swallow was more beautiful because the break remained visible. When they finished, Esther brushed the shavings into her palm. "I thought you might ask me to take your name," she said. Nora smiled along the old scar. She said names were not aprons to be returned when a woman discovered who had sewn them. Esther could remain Hale. She could honor Lavinia's care without carrying veil. She could call Nora nothing at all until a name became true. Outside, factory whistles marked 5 o'clock. Women filled Cinder Street. A summer storm gathered above the roofs, and the open window carried the smell of rain into the workroom. It was the smell Esther had remembered on the morning of the Jubilee. Wet wool, warm wood, and a kitchen that no longer existed. Nora wrapped the carving knife in its cloth. Esther fitted the green baize back beneath the block, leaving Daniel's words visible at one edge. "For Essie, who will always know the way home." The promise had not come true as Daniel imagined. Home had been divided, guarded, renamed, and nearly lost. No carved bird had guided Esther through it. A factory girl's torn certificate, an artist's watchful hand, a servant's preserved tin, and 2 women's refusal to accept another planted lie had done that work. Nora carried the block to the shelf. Esther stopped her. "Mother," she said. The word was quiet. It did not restore the years. It did not forgive Lavinia, absolve Esther, or make poverty noble. It asked for no performance from the woman who heard it.
Nora stood with her back turned until the trembling passed through her shoulders. Then she placed the block between them instead of on the shelf. They sat beside the open window while rain began over Bellwether. For once, neither woman had to stand outside a door, and on the little wooden crown beneath their resting hands, the swallow had 2 wings.